to talk about the City of San Diego's upcoming funding opportunities with the Community Development Block Grant. This is Connecting the Dots. Are you CDBG ready? My name is Michele Marano, and it's really important to me that communities within the city have all the resources they need to be strong and vibrant. So I've been serving the City of San Diego, my hometown, for about 20 years now as a community development coordinator with the Economic Development Department. And before that, I was an executive director of a nonprofit organization for 10 years. So I do have a little bit of street cred with nonprofits. Before we get started, I wanted to just highlight a couple housekeeping items. The first is that this really is a very specific and detailed presentation about the upcoming grant opportunities with the City of San Diego. If you're an organization that's outside of the City of San Diego, or maybe does not provide services to individuals within the City of San Diego, this might be not the presentation for you specifically. That being said, there is a lot of general information about community development block grants that will be helpful for you in any jurisdiction that you might be considering applying for those types of grant funds. The second is some of the slides you'll see are very text heavy. I'm breaking all the presentation rules, but really that's to give you a resource at the end of this presentation that you can go back to. You can check emails, you can check websites, and make sure you have that available to you after this presentation. And then finally, with questions, if you have questions, please be sure to use that chat box. We have monitors that'll float those up to me. I will try to pause a couple times throughout the presentation to give us a chance to talk about the questions as they come in. Otherwise, we'll take them at the end. And if we don't get to your questions, the email that you see probably on the next slide that has my contact information and also a general CDBG at sandiego.gov website. The CDBG at sandiego.gov is definitely the email you'll want to use if you have questions that I haven't answered today. I'll have that at the beginning of the presentation and then also at the end. So with that, let's get started and we'll talk about what you will be learning in today's presentation. I think we need to go 2 more slides. There we go. So today you're going to learn about the mission, vision, and goals of the City of San Diego, and that'll help you as you're contemplating applying for our funding opportunities. A little bit about the basics of CDBG, Community Development Block Grants. I'm going to try not to use abbreviations if I can avoid it, because we tend to talk in alphabet soup. So again, Community Development Block Grants is CDBG. We'll talk a little bit about the grant application process. What are the prerequisites for your organization in order to successfully apply for grants? And then also, what types of projects are eligible for these funds? Some tips and tricks on being successful, and then we'll talk about the next steps in our funding cycle. So with that being said, as you consider the rest of my presentation, for the rest of the hour we have together, please try to think about how your organization's mission aligns with the city's goals, our values, our mission. Everyone has a value statement, everyone has a mission statement, and so the vision for the City of San Diego is to be a world-class city for all. Next slide, please. And our mission is to effectively serve and support our communities. So at everything that we look at when we're considering partnering, when we're considering granting funds, we have these missions and this vision in mind. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, we set goals for our city. To provide high-quality public services, to work in partnership with all of our communities to achieve safe and livable neighborhoods, and then also to create and sustain a resilient and economically prosperous city. And in order to do that, we partner with organizations like yours. We do that to leverage not only financial resources, but also human resources. You all are our boots on the ground for so many services that mean so much to the vulnerable populations in our community. And so we thank you for that. So as we consider what CDBG is, please again, continue to think about how your mission for your organization aligns with the city's mission. So what is CDBG? Again, it's Community Development Block Grants. And The entitlement program is administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's a federal program. It's an entitlement program, which means the city does not have to apply for these funds every year. They're subject to federal appropriation. So as long as the Congress is passing the federal budget that has a CDBG allocation in it, the city will receive its portion of funds, which tends to run around $10 million to $11 million a year. We have a primary objective of improving the living environment for our communities, expanding economic opportunities, and also providing decent housing. And the key is all of these programs must benefit a low and moderate income resident or area. Next slide. Oh, thank you. The goals and priorities of the CDBG program are determined by a consolidated planning process. So this is going to get a little bit in the weeds and details, but really if you remember anything from this slide, it's say, do, show. So what we do is we have a 5-year plan. It's called a consolidated plan. It's available online, and it tells the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development what we're going to do. We're saying what we're going to do with these federal funds for the next 5 years. It's very broad. And then on an annual basis, we submit to HUD something called an action plan. The action plan is telling the federal government, now that you've given us these funds, thank you very much, these are the projects we are going to fund, these are the outcomes that we anticipate. This is what we're going to do with what we said we were going to do. And then the last part of our planning process is something called a CAPER, Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report. That's done at the end of every fiscal year. And it tells HUD, these are the nonprofit organizations we worked with, these were the outcomes that we achieved, these were the funds that we spent. So it's showing HUD that we did what we said we were going to do. Those documents are all available online, and it does help you get an idea of the types of projects we've funded in the past. And part of that is there are 7 goals in our consolidated planning process, and those are the goals that not only we have to work for our city goals, but also we need to work towards these goals with federal dollars. And they relate to affordable rental and homeowner housing opportunities, small business and local support for entrepreneurs, investing in employment and workforce development programs, providing public services and facilities and critical infrastructure, as well as serving vulnerable populations and helping with individuals experiencing homelessness. That's on the next slide, I believe. And then also working to provide impactful nonprofit facility improvements. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as far as what types of specific projects fit within those goals. We also have some guiding strategies in our consolidated plan. Those are inclusive economic growth, economic resiliency and sustainability, and catalytic community investment. So with economic growth, we are working to reduce poverty through better access to jobs, education, transportation, and employment. With resilience, I think a perfect example is what we're going through right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. Whether it's the local economy, a small business, or individual households, we are trying to make investments to help recover, withstand, and avoid change in the environment. And these changes can be caused by economic downturns or loss of an industry, a national disaster, a global pandemic, or even at a household level, a medical emergency, a loss of a vehicle. So we're trying to assist in becoming more resilient. And then finally, catalytic community investments are to invest in impactful projects in communities that, it will spur development, it will spur growth in the other parts of the neighborhood. So the eligibility for community development block grants, try to go over this somewhat quickly because this is the real, we're in the weeds now. There are 3 national objectives for community development block grants. They are low and moderate income benefit, slum and blight removal, or urgent need. Historically, it's been the city's policy to focus on low and moderate income benefit. That's because we have a federal requirement to spend at least 70% of our CDBG funds on low and moderate income benefit. And this can be achieved in several ways. We can look at area benefits, where we are helping to improve primarily residential areas where at least 51% of the residents are low and moderate income based on census data. Limited clientele, this is where services are being provided directly to individuals, and we're able to track the income level of those individuals, and 51% of them are low and moderate income. There's also a way to do that with limited clientele for presumed low-income individuals. Those would be in categories such as elderly individuals, 62 and older, abused children, battered spouses, severely disabled adults, homeless individuals, and then others. And those groups are assumed to be low and moderate income, so there's no income documentation required of those services. Then there's also jobs, providing low income jobs, so jobs to individuals with low and moderate incomes. And then there's also a household benefit. You are either providing rehabilitation or sustainability improvements to homeowners that have low and moderate incomes, or rental assistance. The other types of national objectives, again, are eliminating slum and blight, and then also responding to urgent need. This would be when there is some sort of natural disaster, for example, and the city's funds may not be able to fully bring us back to normal, and so CDBG is able to meet that gap. We do, and just so you know, we do have technical assistance workshops throughout the entire application process, so we will get into those details with you on an individual basis. This is really just meant to be an overview. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions right now about, no questions at the moment? Okay. So I think we're good. We will move on. So the next part of our process is, we're good. I think we're good. All right, so the next part of our process is how we pre-screen for capacity. So how do you get behind that velvet rope and get access to these funds with the City of San Diego? It's something, we have a two-phase process, and we call our annual process a Notice of Funding Availability, or a NOFA. So no, it's not a old car, a NOVA. It is a NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, and there are two parts: an RFQ, which is a request for qualifications, and then an RFP, a request for proposals. So the first phase is the RFQ phase, and we're looking at, is your organization ready to contract with the City of San Diego? And then in the RFP process, that's when we're looking at what type of program or service are you looking to fund? Why are you applying for these funds? What do you want to do with them? So the first part, again, is the request for qualifications process. In the next slide, you can kind of see what we're looking for when we are asking you to fill out those responses. We want to know if you have organizational capacity, programmatic and fiscal capacity. What's your past experience working with low and moderate income populations? What type of financial controls do you have in place? And then what is the alignment of your organization's mission and goals, values with the City of San Diego's? We will be asking for your address, your contact information. Who are your board members? Where is your where are your offices located? Where might your project be located? What type of communities do you serve? And we will ask for your mission statement. Some of the other things that we ask for, and this is this is the most difficult part of the application, honestly. We're looking for the articles of incorporation for your organization, your IRS employment identification number, a DUNS number, and I will talk a little bit about what a DUNS number is. Your tax determination letters from the IRS, your tax determination letters from the California Franchise Tax Board, and then finally, proof of registration with the California Attorney General's Registry of Charitable Trusts. So the difficult portion about this is getting it all together in one place. no one element of this little arrow chart is difficult. It can be time consuming to get a copy of your federal registry with charitable trusts if you've never done it before. If you don't have a DUNS number yet, that process can take a couple weeks. So that's why we have this list of prerequisites available online, and the next few slides are going to give you the web pages for where you can access this information. We're planning, and I'll give you a little sneak preview, we're planning to release our NOFA for fiscal year 22, which would start July 1st of 2021. We're planning to release that at the end of this month. So if you go back to your office and you don't know where every single one of these items is, you might want to start looking for that now and start preparing for that now so that you're ready when September 25th rolls around and we're releasing our RFQ. So with that, these are the rule-breaking slides. The DUNS number is a 9-digit identification number, and it's based on the physical location of your business. It is free, and it's something that you will be required to have in order to access federal funds. Not only will you need to get the DUNS number assigned to your organization, but it has to be registered on the sam.gov website and show as active. So if it's being renewed or it's pending, that will be something that will preclude you from qualifying for these funds in the future. So we want to make sure that it's an active status. And those websites are where you can look to make sure that you have that. The next slide shows a few of the other resources for you with regard to the charitable trust registration, the Secretary of State, and sam.gov. So other things that we're looking for in the RFQ are internal controls. We just want to make sure that no single person in your organization has sole authority over all financial steps of budgeting and issuing payments, those types of things. We do ask you to submit copies of your financial controls, your procurement policies, I believe also record keeping. We're not getting into the details of those during the RFQ process. We just want to see them. By the time we get to contract award, that's when we might ask you to make changes to those policies if they're required. Procurement methods, again, those are things where we want to make sure that you are, if you're having your facility painted, even if Uncle Joe is a great painter, you can't directly go to Uncle Joe and have him paint your facility. We have to make sure that you're procuring your services with a competitive process. And there are 5 ways to do that that are highlighted by regulation. And they are based on micro purchases, small purchases, sealed bids, competitive proposals, or non-competitive proposals. And just the last time I checked, I believe micro purchases were defined as like at $3,000 or less. So those are pretty straightforward. It's just when we get into the $150,000 purchases or more when we get into the competitive bidding process. We're also going to ask for certifications in the request for qualifications process. So when your qualified individual who's submitting your response to us, they will be certifying that you aren't lobbying, politically lobbying, that you're not a debarred or suspended organization, that you have a drug-free workplace policy, that you'll comply with the Civil Rights Act and ADA compliance, and also that there are no conflict of interest and that you have a procurement policy in place. And again, we'll also be asking for copies of those documents that I showed in the slide previously with your sam.gov registration, your organization charts, and also your tax determination letters. And then the last element of the request for qualifications process that can be a little bit burdensome for smaller nonprofit organizations is on the next slide, which is the required financial documents. So the City of San Diego does require that all nonprofit organizations applying for grant funds have a board-approved audited financial statement for the most recently completed fiscal year. And that really is a non-negotiable requirement. And I'll tell you a little bit why in the next couple slides. But that is something that we definitely will need you to have in order to access these CDBG funds. So there are really two elements of the audit. If your organization is smaller, it would be audited financial statements for the fiscal year end date of June 30th, 2019 or later. And if you're a larger organization and you've expended $750,000 or more in federal funds, we will need a program-specific or single audit for those funds, and that must be filed with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, so we'll ask for documentation of that. But I want to say about 80% of the nonprofit organizations that we work with don't fall within that we've spent $750,000 or more category. So we're really looking at the audited financial statements, which the cost can range between around $3,000 and $8,000 to get. But I'm sure in the fiscal capacity and competency courses that are offered throughout this nonprofit academy, after you take those, you'll understand why that's a requirement for our programs. And really, the audited financial statements help us determine the amount of money that we can give to you as an organization. So we're looking at the cash balance on that audited financial statement. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about a maximum funding threshold. So determined by the cash balance from your audited financial statement, because we have minimum allocations that we can give to nonprofit organizations defined by council policy. So if you're applying for funds and you want to offer a meal delivery service, that's considered a public service, and under our council policy, the minimum allocation we can give is $50,000. The CDBG program is also based on reimbursements. So we have to make sure that your organization has the capacity to spend $50,000 in order to be reimbursed for it. And so how we do that is we look at your cash balance on your audited financial statements. So you're going to have a minimum cash balance of $12,500 to access that $50,000 program. If you're looking for a larger program that would be $100,000 or more, then your minimum balance would need to be $25,000. And then the amounts also limited by the overall budget for the category of RFP, and it applies to all of your organization's projects. And I'll get into that a little bit later. I'll give you a more specific example, so we'll just kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. But again, it's because of this reimbursement process. So I'll get into that a little bit more. So let's say, for example, we start your contract in July. So you make expenses in July. You would submit the receipts for those expenses to our department in August, because you have to have spent everything in July 1st, get the receipts, submit them to us in August. In August, we review your expenditures, make sure they're eligible, make sure we have the documentation that's required for our audits with HUD, and then we submit a payment request for your organization. That can take another 30 days from the date of the invoice. So you'll be getting paid in September, July, August, September. So we want to make sure that your organization has the capacity to continue to meet payroll, to continue to provide those services in August and September while you're waiting for that July reimbursement. So that again is why we need to have those audited financial statements. So some common disqualifiers, really it's the audit certificate or not having audited financial statements. I mean, that really has been the main disqualifier over the last 3 or 4 years. It can also be that maybe you submitted some statements, but they were for the wrong year, or they didn't quite meet the requirements. Maybe your board hadn't approved them yet. We also have seen that there have been some wrong attachments in ED Grants. ED Grants is our system, our online portal that we use for all of our applications. So we can verify an attachment has been attached, but we can't always verify what the attachment is. So say you're supposed to attach your IRS letter of determination, but you accidentally attach your shopping list. That's going to disqualify you, because while there is an attachment there and it's been checked off that there was an attachment for the tax determination letter, it wasn't actually the tax determination letter that was attached. And we will be checking for the minimum funding request threshold. So we do input your cash balance from your audited financial statements, and we do verify that it meets that minimum 50,000, 100,000 requirement, and if it doesn't, that is a disqualifier. So the RFQ process does help us confirm that your organization is a safe investment of public funds. Your organization has the fiscal capacity and the program design experience to successfully work with our Community Development Block Grant Program. And then we get to the fun part, which is what are your goals, what is your project that you want this money for? And that's when we move on to the request for proposals. And I'll take a little moment here to see if there's any questions on the request for qualifications. And I think we have none. So we're good. We will move on to the next phase then, which is the RFP. So once your organization is determined to be qualified, we will let you know. You will go through this request for qualifications process. We will let you know, yes, you are qualified to move on to the next step, or no, you are not qualified and this is why. Qualified applicants are asked to or invited to respond to the request for proposals. And again, this is where you describe the scope of your project, the target population, you'll outline the schedule, you'll let us know how much you're looking for our grant program. You'll list any other funding sources that you might have available and how those funds will be used. And then you're also going to provide any supporting documentation to document that you're ready for this project. That relates primarily to construction projects and proposals. We want to know that you've gone through a permitting process, you have site control, those types of things. So just some examples of what types of projects are available. And I'm going to highlight these very quickly because there's a lot of detail on these slides, but again, it's meant to be a resource for you. And as we go through our funding opportunities, we offer workshops, we'll have video recordings, and we'll also have technical assistance appointments for both the request for qualifications and the request for proposals process. So you can have one-on-one meetings with our staff, and we can answer any questions that you'll have. But just as a very general idea, public services are one category of projects that are eligible for Community Development Block Grant funds. Public services will provide direct services to clients, and they're any of these eligible activities listed on this slide. They are the most competitive. We historically have received about 2 million or 3 million in requests, and we tend to have between 500,000 and 1 million to give out. And so that's because we are limited by federal law to the percentage of the funds that we can give out. So if our allocation is $10 million from the federal government, we are limited to giving out $1.5 million. It's 15% of our overall entitlement. But again, this is where you're really providing those direct services to clients, and you're able to report their incomes, their demographics, and certify that 51% of your clients are low and moderate income. The next category is community economic development, and it really is kind of our small business assistance program. It's for micro enterprises primarily, which are businesses that have 5 employees or less. And so if your organization provides training to individuals to help them start a personal training business, or to be a barista with a coffee cart, or if your organization helps individuals start their own home-based child care program, this would be the category where you would submit an application. And then the other is nonprofit capital improvement projects, or CIPs, and multifamily housing rehabilitation projects, and those are on the next slide. So with nonprofit capital improvement projects, those are when your nonprofit has a facility that you own and you want to make a change to the property itself. That would be where we can come in and assist you with that, as long as we can document that you are increasing access to low and moderate income individuals by making that improvement. So one example is La Maestra, that converted a file room into a CT scanning room. So that was a way to show that they were increasing access and providing additional services as a result of that improvement. And then multifamily housing rehab. If your organization owns a multifamily housing property, we can assist with providing improvements to those units as long as they are being rented to low and moderate income individuals. And then I'm just going to skip through the last two categories. Single family housing rehabilitation has primarily been an eligible category in the past. We are not going to be funding single family housing rehab projects in fiscal year 22 due to the COVID-19 emergency, but we will be looking at potentially doing those again in fiscal year 23. But these are the eligible activities under single family housing rehab. The same is true for sustainability. We will be pausing funding sustainability projects in fiscal year 22. So for the July 1st, 21 through June 30th, 22 timeframe, we will be pausing sustainability projects. And then finally, just with regard to the CARES Act and the COVID-19 emergency, some of you may have heard about the CARES Act. It is a new piece of legislation that provided all kinds of new funding sources to city governments, local governments, state governments. And so we did receive some additional community development block grant funds under the CARES Act. We received $2.1 million in CDBG, COVID, so CV, CARES Act funds. And then we also received some flexibility for our regular entitlement money in fiscal year 21 so that we could fund additional public services as long as they prepare for, prevent, or respond to the COVID-19 emergency. So we weren't necessarily limited to that 15% I talked about earlier in the slide. So we are able to fund an additional $1.4 million of these types of projects. So again, these public service projects must meet the objective of preparing for, preventing, or responding to COVID-19. So if your nonprofit has a program that has been implemented as a result of this emergency, we can assist you in funding that when you apply through your RFQ and RFP process. We are defining specific eligible activities. And so we're keeping it very narrow, and the goal of that is so that we can expedite the review process and get these funds deployed quickly. So there are 5 categories of eligible activities for these funds. They're healthcare services, senior services, child care services, educational access and meeting the digital divide, and food banks or meal distribution. So those are the 5 types of projects that you would be submitting requests for. And the goal would be to be able to deploy those funds by January of 21. The regular course would be July 1st of next year. So we're hoping to expedite this process by 6 months. Some things for you to keep in mind is something called a duplication of benefits. So anytime we as a city are giving out our dispersing grant funds from an emergency relief package, we have to make sure that we are not paying for something twice. And so if you've received funds from another emergency relief program, we'll be asking for that information in your responses so we can make sure that we're not paying for the same thing with 2 different funding sources. A good example would be the Federal Small Business Administration's Payroll Protection Program, PPP. So if your organization has applied for that to help you with your payroll, we would need to make sure that when you submit your budget to us, we are not paying for staff that was also receiving payments from that PPP program. And again, we'll have technical assistance to offer detailed advice on, and assistance on that as we proceed forward, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you're thinking about applying. And I think we went through those 5. Oh, and then I did notice on that last slide, sorry, did you mind going back on that one? We had a to be determined amount. We did go ahead and determine that we're going to reduce the minimum allocation for that to $25,000. And the goal is to try to reach some of those smaller nonprofit organizations that may not have that $12,500 cash balance in their financial statements. So we are reducing the minimum allocation to $25,000 for these types of programs. And then finally, the next slide does have some resources for you. Those are all available on our website. Operating manual, playing by the rules handbook, how to calculate income eligibility. If you really want to geek out, there's all kinds of Code of Federal Regulations notations here. And then our ED Grants Resources tab. So I think that's coming up in a couple slides, so we will be able to show you what ED Grants looks like. So the next slide is just a preview of insurance requirements that if you are awarded funds, these would be the insurance requirements that you would need to maintain for your organization in order to contract with the City of San Diego. The City of San Diego would need to be listed as an additional insured on your commercial general liability and automobile liability policies, and then there would need to be a waiver of subrogation on the workers' compensation policy. Your insurance broker is going to know what all that means. And again, this is something that there is a cost associated with this. We understand that. You can budget that into the budget that you propose for your project. So we just want you to be aware of this and the costs that might be associated with it so you can prepare for that. The next slide is a link to our ED Grants portal. So this is available online. This is how the City of San Diego manages our entire grant cycle, from application to award to contracts to submitting reimbursements. It's all here. There are tabs, and if you'll see there's a resource tab at this website. You do not need to have a login. You do not need to have a password in order to access these resources or the frequently asked questions. You can go there right now and look at all of this information. The resources tab has 2 tutorials where they are screenshot by screenshot examples of how to register your organization and get a password, and then how to submit an RFQ response. Those are going to be so helpful for you if you decide that you're interested in accessing these funds through the City of San Diego. So just a couple tips and tricks when you're considering applying for funds with our program. You'll definitely want to register your organization in ED Grants early and become familiar with how it works. And again, there are tutorial screenshots and even some videos, I believe, on the resources tab available to you, and we offer technical assistance on that as well. You're going to want to choose one person to be the lead contact for your organization, so that one person with your organization is communicating with one person from our organization, just to keep all of the messages and information clean. Definitely want to read the handbook. So we will be releasing a handbook on the RFQ process, request for qualifications, as well as the RFP process. And these are meant to try to answer and anticipate your questions. There's also technical assistance appointments, as I've mentioned. Please take advantage of those. We offer 30-minute sessions. It used to be in person. Now we'll do them virtually until we're allowed to do them in person again. But they really are a great opportunity for you to ask any question of us. We will do our best to respond. You know, obviously we can't say you should write your grant proposal like this, or you need to make sure you say this. But we can definitely help you with what's eligible, what's not eligible, what might be eligible. How could we maybe convert an ineligible proposal to something that might be eligible? So take advantage of that. We're here to help you for sure. The next is to start the process early and allow enough time to review your application and your responses. I cannot tell you how many times we've had individuals trying to open the application 15 minutes before the deadline. We have about a 4 to 5 week lead time from when the request for qualifications is released to when it's due. Make sure you take the time to get open the application, see what's involved, and make sure that you have a valid password, you can access it and submit it by the deadline. There is nothing, I can't even imagine how frustrating it must be to work on something and then try to submit it, and you're submitting it a minute after the deadline. Our system, it's electronic now. That's one of the maybe curses of technology, is if it's a minute late, it's not eligible to be submitted. And then have someone proofread your applications. We've heard this from our Consolidated Plan Advisory Board. So our Consolidated Plan Advisory Board is the group of 9 volunteers that review and score all of our applications. And they've kind of said their pet peeve is seeing typos or not really understanding what's being written as a third party reading the application for the first time. So if you have the ability, have a neighbor, have a child, have your husband or wife or friend read the application, someone who isn't involved in your industry, so that if they can understand it, then we are sure that your message is getting across to the individuals who are reading and scoring the application. And then finally, again, if you do have any questions throughout any of this process, please make sure to email cdbg@sandiego.gov, and we're here to help you. The reason why I say email cdbg@sandiego.gov and not my personal email or maybe another program manager or project manager that you've worked with in the past is that we might be working on another priority project, or I might be giving a presentation like this. And so if you're emailing to that general cdbg@sandiego.gov email address, we can make sure that all of our colleagues who are checking that can respond to you quickly. And I think that's the most efficient way to get responses rather than emailing an individual directly. So the next step, so we are in the thick of it. We have the annual NOFA for fiscal year 22 as well as the CARES Act funds. So we are running those parallel. We wanted to efficiently use your time as well as efficiently use our staff's time. And so we are going to be running 2 parallel tracks, one for the fiscal year 22 process, the other for the CARES Act funds, those extra funds that are meant to prepare for, prevent, or respond to COVID-19. Those are both going to be released this fall, the end of September. Then there will be notices that you're qualified or not qualified, and you'll be invited to submit responses to a request for proposal. The Consolidated Plan Advisory Board will be scoring the fiscal year 22 applications, so they will be scoring in the January-February timeframe. And again, those CARES Act applications will not be scored because we have the 5 very specific eligible categories that we'll be looking for. And then finally, for fiscal year 22, those will be submitted to City Council in the spring. And then this is just a more detailed timeline for you. We are planning to have an RFQ workshop. It'll be virtual on the 21st of September. It's going to be very much like this. It's going to talk about the eligible activities, the prerequisites. It might get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of the details for applying through our ED grants program. And so that might be helpful for you if you are considering applying. You'll be able to see the ED grants program at work. And again, there are some timeframes for technical assistance appointments and when we anticipate notifying organizations of the results. And just a couple more things and resources for you. The next page is a page for all of the funding opportunities with the City of San Diego. These are funding opportunities not only with our Community Development Block Grant Program, but with our economic development partners in business expansion and retention, as well as the arts and culture community, and also funding sources through the council offices themselves. So if you don't necessarily think community development block grants are the right fit for you, definitely take a look at this slide and the link here. because the other funding opportunities are detailed with contacts and their kind of grant cycles and their application processes as well. So it's a valuable resource for you. And then just as a reminder, our team is dedicated to people, integrity, excellence, and service, and we are here to help you. We want to help you be successful. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. No questions. Well, thank you very much for your time. And again, if you do have questions and find yourself looking through this in the future, please send them to cdbg@sandiego.gov, and we will be sure to get you a response. Have a great day.